In 1893, the renowned American medical school, Johns Hopkins University, admitted women for the first time. And then, in a scandalous development, a full 33% of the women they admitted went on to marry faculty members. Okay, it wasn't that scandalous because they only admitted 3 women that year, and only one of them went on to marry a faculty member. This is an example of how a statistic based on a small sample size can give you a skewed idea of what's actually happening. And that's just one of the ways that people can manipulate statistics to make you think what they want you to think. In this video, we're going to look at this and some of the other ways that the media twist, abuse, distort, and otherwise get statistics wrong. Understanding statistics might not sound like it's the sexiest topic in the world, but it's actually critically important. We use statistics all the time to decide how to invest, what to put in our bodies, and in some cases, who to hate. That's why manipulating and misrepresenting charts, graphs, and statistics have always been important tools in the propaganda toolbox. There's just something about lines and numbers and colors that short circuits our critical thinking. I mean, look at this thing. It must be science, right? Right? It also doesn't help that when most of us encounter charts and graphs these days, we encounter them like this. On a phone with dynamic text flashing on top of it, and someone floating around vaguely pointing at what they want you to notice. Maybe there's a pop-up ad. I'm not saying this to dump on creators who make short videos like this because, hell, I make short videos like this. But we need to understand that this is not an optimal way to process visual data. In fact, there's something very, very wrong with the graphic behind me right now, but you probably haven't noticed it because of all the other distracting visual elements on the screen. We're going to come back to this later. Finally, before we jump in for real, I've pinned a link in the first comment that explains the difference between charts and graphs. You should read it. And also I want to mention that this video draws extensively, but not exclusively, from this book, How to Lie with Statistics by Darrell Huff. This is an incredibly useful book. You should read it. It's only 120 pages long, so you can plow through it in a couple of days. And this book came out in 1954, more than 70 years ago, and it's still relevant. And as I'm always saying here on the channel, propagandists and disinformers have been using the same techniques for decades, if not centuries, and we keep falling for them. We need to do better. Heck, H.G. Wells said this in 1903. Statistical thinking will one day be as necessary for efficient citizenship as the ability to read and write. So, with that being said, let's look at some of the ways the media abuse statistics and what we can do about them. Number 1. A statistic without raw data backing it up is 95% useless. And yes, I made that statistic up. Basically, if you don't know the raw numbers behind a statistic, then it's not telling you that much. You might read that in a particular area, ethnic group A has double the birth rate of ethnic group B. If you're the kind of person who thinks something like that is a problem, you'll probably say to yourself, wow, group B better get busy getting busy. But if there are already 10 times as many group B families than group A families in the area, group B is still larger by far than group A and will likely stay that way for the foreseeable future, despite their lower birth rate. When you're considering an opinion poll or a scientific study, it's important to know the sample size that they use to generate the data. Simply put, the sample size is the number of people who agreed to respond to the opinion poll or participate in the study. Generally, the larger the sample size you have, the better. I opened this video with an example of how a small sample size can be used to create a statistic that gives you a false impression. Pollsters, marketing firms, and scientific researchers all have their own methodologies for determining how big their sample size should be, and this video is way too short for me to get into that alchemy. But when it comes to public opinion polls or marketing surveys, even knowing the sample size is only half the battle. For example, let's say that you're like me, a guy over 50, and you see a YouTube ad that says 55% of doctors surveyed recommend taking a supplement called Boost a Crotch. Wow, you think, maybe I should start taking that. So you check the sample size. Okay, it's about 2,500 doctors. That's a good sample size. Or is it? Yes, 2,500 doctors might have agreed to participate in the survey, but you have no idea how many doctors they asked to participate in the survey. They might have asked 15,000 doctors, the vast majority of whom couldn't be bothered to respond. This makes your sample size of 2,500 doctors a little less valuable because it only reflects the relatively small number of doctors who responded and not the vast majority of medical professionals. You also don't know if the doctors who responded received some incentive for participating in the survey, or what they were even asked in the survey. For example, they might have asked if they recommended taking Boostercrotch over not taking any kind of supplement at all, or if they recommended taking Boostercrotch over, I don't know, T-maxing by mainlining Red Bulls mixed with black market tiger blood. Genuine medical researchers and public opinion firms will make all this information available, but when it comes to marketing and advertising, your odds of getting this information are pretty low, so keep that in mind. By the way, I want to take a moment here to apologize to the model in that stock photo who had no idea he was going to end up as the face of Boostercrotch. It's also really important to know the data that supports a statistic when you see a statistic that implies cause and effect. Health influencers and their ilk always like to say things like, eating this food or this ingredient increases your chances of getting cancer by 18%. But before you freak out, you're going to want to know what your chances of getting cancer were without eating that particular food or ingredient. If your chance of getting cancer was 0.002%, and that goes up by 18%, it's now 0.02%, which is not zero, but it's also no reason to panic. You should also remember that statistics can be manipulated to play on your biases. If you read somewhere that Republicans are 10% more likely to cheat on their taxes than Democrats, you're going to want to find out how likely Democrats are to cheat on their taxes before you get up on your high horse and start denouncing people on social media. One area where you frequently see manipulation and misrepresentation of statistics is crime rates. Although the people who manipulate crime statistics tend to do it backwards. They dump the raw data on you and then don't give you any of the statistical information that you need to help make sense of it. So you'll see a lot of statements like, Big Cityopolis had over 800 more incidents of violent crime last year than small townville. Big Cityopolis is scary. But is it? There's a lot of information missing from that statement. For example, how many incidents of violent crime are we talking about? How are we defining violent crime? Does that definition of violent crime include domestic violence, which is obviously horrible but not indicative of a city's overall safety? What are the populations of Big Cityopolis and Small Townville? Big Cityopolis probably has a much higher population than Small Townville. So even though the overall number of violent crimes is higher, the per capita crime rate might be lower, so you might actually be more likely to be a victim of violent crime in Small Townville. Number 2, learn to read between the lines, or in this case, the axes. I'm going to take you all back to high school for a moment, because some of you out there either never learned this next bit, or you learned it and forgot it. Any line graph, column chart, or bar chart will have an x-axis and a y-axis. Both of these axes meet at a point called the origin. The y-axis generally represents an amount of money, or people, or sales, or whatever, and the x-axis represents time, or if it's a column chart, it represents the categories being referenced in the chart. Put the two axes together, and you can see a trend over time, whether it's corporate profits or population growth or whatever. By the way, a bar chart is basically a column chart kind of flipped on its side so that the y-axis is on the bottom. With me so far? Good. When you're looking at a line graph or a bar chart, it's very important to make sure that the y-axis actually starts at 0. If it doesn't, all manner of shenanigans can ensue. It's also very important to note the amount of time being covered on the x-axis, and here's why. Let's say I start a cryptocurrency, and because I am a cheesy bastard, let's say I call it Cryptile. Cryptile does okay, and its value has held relatively steady over the past couple of years, minus one big setback. Not bad. But I want to dominate the crypto world, and I want to get everyone super hyped about getting on the Cryptile train. So what if I tweak these parameters a bit? What if I start the y-axis at, say, 3,000, and dial the x-axis back to Cryptile's lowest value? Whoa, now it looks like Cryptile is taking off like a rocket. You're going to want to get a piece of that action. And sometimes people manipulate the y-axis because they want to change your mind, not just take your money. This is a rather infamous 2011 chart from Fox News illustrating the effect of letting George W. Bush's tax cuts expire. Looks pretty bad, right? Well, when you notice that the y-axis starts at 34%, not really. If the y-axis had started at 0 the way it should, the chart would look like this. And these days, you have to make sure that there even is a y-axis. Online creator Alex Falcone has noted that big tech companies like Apple and Nvidia have started releasing graphs with no y-axis at all, or a y-axis that's completely unlabeled. This is supposedly because they both embrace a minimalist design philosophy, but you end up with a chart that can say pretty much anything they want it to. By the way, Alex Falcone is great. Check him out. I will link to him on the sources page. And finally, and I can't believe I have to say this, sometimes you have to make sure that The 0 on the y-axis is actually at the bottom. Here's the graph that I referenced earlier in the video showing gun deaths in Florida before and after Florida instituted its Stand Your Ground law. Now, it looks like the Stand Your Ground law led to a sharp drop in gun deaths, until you notice that they put 0 at the top of the y-axis. This graph is literally upside down. Gun deaths actually dramatically increased. And by the way, we're still not done with this graph. I'm going to come back to it again later in the video. Number 3. When it comes to numbers, words matter. Sometimes the statistics matter less than how people describe them. For example, back in the 1890s, a journalist named Lincoln Steffens decided to punch up a slow news month by reporting on every crime he could find in deep, gruesome detail. These articles proved to be a huge hit, so a competing journalist named Jacob Rees decided to get in on the act. And pretty soon, New York City thought it was in the grip of a major crime wave, even though crime rates were actually going down. New Yorkers demanded that City Hall take action. And that's exactly what Police Board President Teddy Roosevelt did. He called Rees and Steffens and told them to knock it off. And because both men had a good relationship with Roosevelt, they agreed to tone it down. Man, I am so glad we no longer live in an age where people just make stuff up in order to sell newspapers. Now we do it for clicks. And that's just one way media spin can influence how we understand data. Sometimes parties with competing agendas can present the same data, accurate data, but you'll walk away with wildly different interpretations based on whose presentation you see. Let's say a politician launches a program to improve broadband internet access in underserved rural areas, and they manage to bring broadband to 75% of the households in the area. If you're in that politician's party, you're going to write a press release that says something like, 75% of homes that once lagged behind now leap ahead with better access to information, job opportunities, and the economy of the future. But if you're in the opposition party, your press release is going to read, failed initiative leaves 25% of homes stuck with low-speed internet, cut off from information, job opportunities, and the economy of the future. Same data, different presentations giving wildly different impressions. You also have to watch out when historical events are inserted into a graph in a way that implies the event caused the trend over time that you're seeing in the graph. Let's go back to that gun deaths graph, which is the gift that keeps on giving. As we noted earlier, we see here that gun deaths go up after the 2005 introduction of Stand Your Ground laws. Does this mean that Stand Your Ground is why gun deaths went up? Maybe? It seems like you're certainly meant to infer that from the chart. But there just isn't enough information here for you to make that conclusion. You've got to do some more research into the nature of all those additional gun deaths because, unfortunately, there are a lot of ways for people to die from guns. By the way, this graph is exempt from everything I just said. This is objectively true. So, where does all this leave us? We are bombarded with manipulated graphs, charts, and statistics every day, and that's only going to get worse as we head into an election year. And I haven't even covered all the ways that people can manipulate statistics. This video is way too short for me to go into all of them. If you'd like me to revisit this topic, let me know in the comments. But what can you do right now to protect yourself from manipulated statistics? Well, first, read How to Lie with Statistics. Like I said, it's an incredibly short but incredibly useful book. It'll give you lots of tools that you can use to check if a statistic has been tweaked. But unfortunately, you might be too overwhelmed to actually use any of those tools because, like I said, we are bombarded with manipulated stats all day, every day. So just like with any other kind of disinformation, you need to choose your battles. I've said over and over again in these videos that if you encounter something online that inspires a powerful emotional reaction in you, stop. Because propaganda and disinformation are designed to provoke that kind of reaction. And that's the time to fact check and make sure you know what you're looking at before you engage deeply with the material or, heaven forbid, you share it. The same goes for statistics. If you encounter a persuasive statistic or a slickly produced infographic that's really making you think about how to invest, what to put on your body, who to vote for, or whether or not you should be afraid of this particular ethnic group, that's the time to really interrogate that data and make sure it's accurate and make sure that it says what the presenter says it does. Links to all the sources and elements used to create this video are available in the description. And as always, thanks for watching. She's just sitting there purring. She's just so happy to be in the presence of me making a YouTube video. it counts.